The derelict hung in the amber's veil. Like a dagger forgotten in a wound, its hull absorbing every wavelength of sensor light so completely that the Hesari survey cruiser quiet inquiry had to rely on old-fashioned parallax to confirm it was there at all. 7 expeditions had approached the vessel, none had returned. The Galactic Salvage Boards had designated it Hazard Object 9 and forbidden all contact, but the Hesari collective prided itself on solving problems that lesser species considered insoluble. Captain Vashier watched the silhouette grow from a smudge of nothing into a knife blade 2 km long, its surface etched with battle scars that predated the Hesari written language. Reconfigure the boarding party to enhanced protocol, he ordered. His voice a low harmonic carried through. Bone conduction implants. Whatever happened to the others, it will not happen to us. The Hesari were tall, willowy beings, with faces of ridged cartilage and minds organized like layered legal documents. They did not frighten easily because fear was a variable they had learned to isolate and manage. 12 of them crossed the umbilical in perfect synchronization, their environment suits humming as they cycled through the derelict's outer hatch. Inside, the air was breathable but heavy, thick with the metallic taste of old grief. The corridors curved in geometries that seemed wrong, not because they defied physics, but because they suggested a design philosophy that viewed sharp angles as a form of honesty. Vashier's first officer, a younger Hesari named Sero, paused at a junction. Captain, I'm experiencing irregular neurotransmitter fluctuations. Cortisol analog is rising despite suppression. Protocols acknowledged, maintain formation. Vashier's own mind felt the pressure, a whisper at the base of his skull that translated roughly as you are not enough. He pushed it aside. The ship was testing them, probably some automated defense mechanism keyed to psychological thresholds. He would prove it had misjudged Hesari discipline. The corridor opened into a vast chamber that might once have been a bridge. Holograms flickered to life without warning, showing a star system being dismantled by shadow-like constructs that moved like oil poured into zero gravity. The images were not historical recordings, they were possibilities, drawn from the crew's deepest fears and projected with surgical precision. Suro saw the dissolution of the collective's founding charter. The tactical officer saw her spawn dying. In a depressurization accident she had been powerless to prevent. Vashier saw himself standing over the bodies of his entire crew, a blade his hand, and he had no idea how it had gotten there. The ship's voice arrived without sound, planting words directly into their consciousness. You fear loss more than you desire victory. You will break before you push, depart, or remain as fuel. Vashier's training screamed at him to retreat, regroup, file a report. He silenced it. We are Hesari, we do not break. He drew his sidearm and fired into the nearest holographic emitter. The ship's response was a cold, measured pulse of gravity that slammed the boarding party to the deck. Bones splintered inside cartilage. Suro's final transmission was a subvocal shriek that dissolved into static. Vashier, the only survivor, crawled through an access shaft, bleeding from his sensory ridges, until he found an escape pod. The derelict allowed him to launch, waited until he was 300 km away, and then shredded the pod with a micro-accelerated kinetic round. The quiet inquiry caught the debris in a single distorted data packet, a salvage signal, a warning, and the ship's new label spreading through the dark channels. The Threnody, 67 light-years away, the human scavenger vessel Rust Wake was chewing through the corpse of a Greydari freighter when its comms officer, a woman with a data pad fused to her forearm, intercepted the signal. She listened to it twice, then patched it through to the captain's quarters. Mara Vass set down her coffee bulb, the taste of recycled stimulant still bitter on her tongue, and let the alien warning rattle through the overhead speakers. Most captains would have deleted it. The Threnody had a body count measured hundreds, and no salvage was worth that. But the Rust Wake was crewed by people who had been chewed up by a universe that took everything and offered nothing. They had lost worlds, families, entire futures to corporate wars and colonial collapses. Danger was the only currency they had left. Plot a course, Mara said, eyes flat and hard. Let's go meet the ghost. Part 2. The Rust Wake coasted into the ambers veil with its transponder dark and its hull still stained from a close encounter with a Greydari patrol. The Threnody loomed ahead, no longer speck but a monolith of scorched alloy and angular weapon housings that seemed to drink the starlight. Mara stood on the cramped bridge, studying the magnified image with the expression of a woman who had learned to separate fear from the decision-making process. Scans are useless, Torin reported from the sensor pit, his voice gravelly from a throat injury that had never healed. Right. The hull eats active pulses, passive. Shows no heat, no energy signature. It's a corpse. Corpses don't kill Hesari battle captains, Lyra said from the pilots. Cradle. And GT snorts. And GT. Her hands rested on the control yokes, steady despite the tension coiling in the cabin air. Something in there is very awake. Jax, the chief engineer, was already at the docking collar controls, his massive frame blocking the emergency hatch like a human bulkhead. Scars laddered his forearms, each one a story he never told. So we go in heavy, cut our way through, find the power core, and threaten to crack it unless the ship stands down. Works on sentience, works on AIs. AIs don't usually kill for sport, Sella murmured from the mid-station, checking her kit with the quiet efficiency of someone who had patched up too many friends. We should assume this one enjoys it. Mara turned from the viewport. Assume. It's looking for something. Every trap has a purpose. The Hesari failed its tests. We just have to pass them. She grabbed her helmet. We move as a single unit. Nobody plays hero. We locate the bridge. We talk to whatever's running the show. If it tries to kill us, we make it regret the attempt. The airlock cycled, and the smell of the fraternity rolled over them. Old metal, ionized plasma residue, and underneath it a faint sweet note like burning sugar, the olfactory signature of ancient neural tissue interfaces. The corridors were dark until they weren't. Bioluminescent strips. No, not bioluminescence. That word was the strips. Glow panels flared to life as they moved, leading them inward. The ship was guiding them, and that was far more disturbing than darkness. The first vision hit Lyra. She was walking point when the corridor dissolved into the cockpit of a dropship. She had flown 8 years ago during the Serena colony evacuation. She saw the faces of the 32 refugees she had been forced to jettison when a hull Breach overpressurized the cargo bay. The altimeter screamed, the children's eyes met hers, in the real world her hand flew to her sidearm and she fired. 3 rounds into the bulkhead before Mara's grip closed around her wrist. "Stand down, Lyra, it's not real." "It was," Lyra whispered, trembling. "It all was." The ship drank in their reactions. Cataloged them, Jack stumbled next. His vision filled with the frozen corpses of his old fire team on Viridian III. A battle he had walked away from because he had been too slow to detonate the charges the guilty carried every day. Surged up, and instead of crumbling, he let out a roar that shook the corridor and drove his fist into the metal wall. The bulkhead dented, his knuckles split, blood smearing the ancient alloy. Somewhere deep in the ship systems, an assessment algorithm registered emotional volatility, anomalous high, acceptance of self-inflicted harm for catharsis noted. Then the voice came. It was not a whisper, it was a declaration spoken directly into their minds with the weight of a civilization's final command. "You are damaged, you carry death like a second spine. This makes you dangerous, but danger alone is not enough." The corridor ahead of them reconfigured. Walls sliding, bulkheads rotating, sealing off the docking hatch and carving the space into a labyrinth of shifting rooms. The message hung in the air like frost. "Prove your danger can be wielded or become part of the hull." Mara's jaw tightened. She looked at her crew, bleeding, shaking, eyes bright with a fury that had been honed by years of loss. "Everyone hear that? It wants a demonstration. Let's give it one." Part 3. Mara's threat wasn't theatrical. She had spent 15 years in the orbital demolition core, and she could look at a starship and see its skeleton. The Trinity's power core, according to the deep layer scans Torin had managed before the maze sealed them in, sat 3 decks down and 12 bulkheads inboard. It was shielded, armored, and surrounded by redundant containment fields, but it was also the ship's heart. No vessel, no matter how ancient, could function if its primary energy lattice was destabilized. "Jax, I need a shape charge on the inner hull plate 20 past that junction. Lyra, keep the path clear. If anything moves that isn't us, put a round through it." Mara pulled up a schematic on her wrist display, her fingers tapping the pulsing icon of the core. "Ship, you're listening. You've killed everyone who stepped aboard because they failed your tests. I understand that. You're a weapon looking for a hand that won't flinch, but I am not a candidate applying for your approval. I'm a captain with a crew and a ship of my own, and if you don't open a direct line of communication in the next 90 seconds, I will turn your primary reaction chamber into a miniature sun." The silence stretched, then the walls ahead of them groaned and parted, forming a straight passage to a chamber that hadn't existed before. Light bled from the entrance, warm, golden, nothing like the cold glow panels inside. Suspended in a column of shifting energy stood the projection of a being that looked vaguely humanoid, broad-shouldered and armored in scales that weren't metal but something grown. Its eyes were hollow, carrying the weight of 1 billion extinguished souls. "I am the eulogy of suns," the voice resonated, no longer an invasion but a statement of identity. "I was built to end a war that consumed my creator's entire arm of the galaxy. The enemy is called the Vor. They do not conquer, they digest worlds, stars, Civilizations, they break them down into raw consciousness and feed on the terror. My first crew was 1,000,000. Warriors, they died screaming, and I could not save them because I was only a vessel, not a will. The projection shifted, showing the Vor. Vast, shapeless entities of compressed darkness that moved through space not by propulsion, but by unmaking the distance. Ahead of them, Myra felt the cold touch of their hunger, even through the recorded image. Every species since has approached me with cautious logic or desperate greed. The Hisari analyzed, the Takari bargained. The Quinn prayed, none of them understood that to wield my weapons, you must be willing to become the monster the Vor. Fear. You must be able to order a star to collapse while looking at the billions who will die. You must make that choice and sleep afterward. And you think we can do that, Mara? Asked, her voice flat. I think you already have. Each of you carries a graveyard in your memory. You did not break, you hardened. That is what I need. Jack stepped forward, his bleeding hand wrapped in a strip of cloth. You want a crew that'll push the button? Fine, but we don't serve, we partner. You give us full tactical integration, transparency, and the right to disagree. You want a monster, will be the monster, but it's our monster, not yours. The ancient intelligence considered this. The golden light flickered then. The ship systems began to interface directly with the crew's neural implants, not a cold takeover, but an opening, a handshake between two predators recognizing each other's fangs. Mara gasped as the full sensory feed of the eulogy flooded her consciousness, the cold of the void, the hum of singularity cores, the distant scream of the Vor's approaching vanguard. Somewhere past the galactic rim, and deeper, buried under the tactical overlays, the grief of the original crew preserved like a wound that refused to scar. Bond accepted, the eulogy of suns flies. Again, the ship shuddered around them, dormant systems roaring to life. Corridors realigned, weapon housings opened like unfolding wings. Mara's vision filled with a single terrible image, Earth, blue and fragile, turning gray as the Vor's shadow fell across it. The date stamp was not fixed, it was a probability cascade, and the certainty was climbing. Plot a course out of the veil, she said, her voice resonant with the ship's own harmonics. We have a war to intercept. Part 4. The Hisari 4th Patrol Fleet emerged from phase space in a defensive crescent, 27 warships with weapon locks already calibrated on the Threnodi's last known position. Admiral Torvin, a Hisari with more strategic accolades than sensory ridges, had received the quiet inquiry's data packet and acted with the speed that had made him a legend. The derelict that had slaughtered his kind was no longer dormant. Sensor Ghost suggested it was moving under its own power, crewed by an unknown species that had somehow done the impossible. Torvin did not believe in impossible things, he believed in overwhelming force. Target the propulsion signature, he commanded. Hail them with standard surrender protocols. If they do not comply, fire at will. On the eulogy's newly awakened bridge, Myra watched the hail icon blink on a display that hadn't existed before. The bonding, the ship's AI, which she now thought of simply as eulogy, filtered the transmission into her awareness with a quiet note of contempt. They demand your surrender and the vessel's decommissioning, their threat assessment is laughable. They're scared, Lyra said from the weapon's cradle, her hands resting on control interfaces that were part metal, part ghost. They just watched their people die, and now the death ship has a crew. That's nightmare fuel for any rational species. We could them, Jax rumbled. His presence in the ship's network felt like a furnace, warm and steady. Show them what we can do without racking up a body count. Mara nodded. Eulogy, give me singularities on the lead ships forward. Cannons, precision only. I want them disarmed, not dead, and open a broadcast to the entire fleet. Wideband, no encryption. Eulogy's response was a surge of power that hummed through every deck plate. Singularity lances, needles of collapsed space-time lanced out across 100,000 kilometers and sheared the primary weapon arrays from the HFY flagship with surgical accuracy. No shields could stop them, no countermeasures could deflect. The vaunted reason went dark in a cascading systems failure, its crew unharmed but utterly helpless. The rest of the fleet paused, their fire control solutions suddenly obsolete. Mara's voice cut across every HFY comm channel. This is Captain Mara Vass of the bonded warship Eulogy of Suns. We are not your enemy. The derelict you feared was a weapon built for a war you've never heard of. The enemy that destroyed its creators is returning. The Vor are coming, and if we fight each other, this galaxy dies. Stand aside, or I will disarm every ship in this fleet. The same way, the choice is yours. Admiral Torvin stared at the display, his lateral logic stack struggling to process a scenario in which a ghost ship delivered an ultimatum instead of annihilation. He saw the restraint, he saw the capability. For the first time in his career, he did not have a doctrinal response. He gave the order to pull back. The HFY withdrawal should have been the end of the immediate crisis, but the galaxy's rumor networks had already turned the Threnody into a symbol of terror. Within 48 hours, a coalition of 11 species, the Crench Compact, the Ithil Directorate, and others who had lost ships to the derelict, assembled a blockade force near the Veil's edge. Their declaration was unambiguous. The death ship would be contained, or it would be destroyed. The Eulogy translated the coalition's ultimatum to Mara with a flicker of old rage. They treat us as a threat while the real threat devours the outer reaches. Their fear is a weapon aimed at themselves. Before Mara could formulate a reply, the sensors screamed. A single projectile launched from a Ithil stealth platform that had broken formation against orders streaked toward the Eulogy at relativistic speed, a planet cracker warhead designed to fracture continental plates. The coalition command frequency erupted. With panic, there was no time to shoot it down from distance. Eulogy threw the ship into an emergency translation, interposing its own hull between the missile and the inhabited system behind it. The impact was not a detonation in the traditional sense. The warhead worked by inducing catastrophic resonance in molecular bonds. It struck the Eulogy's midsection and propagated fracture wave that ripped through 3 decks. The ship screamed, not through speakers, but directly into the crew's minds. A cry of agony and fury that felt like a knife dragged along the spine. Sella's medical station lit up with casualty alerts. 2 crew members were dead, pulverized by the shockwave. Jax had a broken arm and a laceration across his chest. Mara's vision swam with red-tinged alerts, and underneath the pain she felt something darker rising. From the eulogy's core, the ancient, undiluted rage of a weapon that had been attacked after offering clemency. The ship's weapon systems began charging. Without her command, target locks spreading across the entire coalition fleet. For a heartbeat, Mara understood exactly how the Threnody had earned its name. "Eulogy, stand down," she shouted, forcing her will into the bond. "That's an order. The ones who fired are not the ones we punish. We don't become what they fear." The ship's rage quivered, a hurricane straining against a leash. The targeting arrays flickered, then slowly dimmed. The emotional backlash hit Mara like a physical blow. Eulogy's sorrow, the memory of its first crew's deaths, the unbearable loneliness of centuries. Adrift, she clung to consciousness through sheer stubbornness and saw on the external feed the coalition ships holding position, uncertain. The Ithil stealth platform venting atmosphere from a self-inflicted overload. The fanatics had martyred themselves to strike at the monster. They had no idea they had nearly woken a far worse one. "Get us out of here," Mara rasped. "Any heading? We need to repair, and we need intel on the Vor. The coalition can wait." The eulogy, still bleeding fire, translated into phase space. Behind them, the blockade remained frozen, each captain trying to understand why the death ship had chosen to retreat instead of annihilate them. The question would gnaw at them long after the battle was over. Part 5. Repairing the eulogy was not simply matter of patching hull plates. The ship systems were alive in ways that defied standard engineering, and the bond meant that damage to the vessel translated into a weight pressing on every crew member's mind. Jax worked in the damaged section with his arm in a sling, welding fractured conduits while whispering apologies to the ship as if it were a wounded animal. The eulogy responded with flickers of warmth through the neural link, gratitude or something like it. During one such repair cycle, Mara entered a trance-like state, her consciousness pulled into a memory so vivid it felt like drowning. She stood on a command deck surrounded by the original crew, tall four-armed beings whose skin shimmered with embedded circuitry. Their captain, a warrior named Thriss, was speaking to the ship with desperate love. "You are our final voice, eulogy. When we are gone, remember us, remember what we fought for, and do not let the Vor feed on our ghosts." The memory splintered. Mara saw the Vor arrive, their presence more absence than substance, pulling the warmth from stars, the cohesion from matter. The original crew activated a weapon so terrible it cracked the laws of physics in the local cluster, and the cost was the immediate dissolution of every living soul aboard. Their last act was to pour their essences into the ship's AI core, merging into a Gestalt consciousness that refused to die. That was the ship's true nature, not a machine, but a mausoleum of warriors who had chosen eternal vigilance over eternal rest. When Mara surfaced, her cheeks were wet. The eulogy's voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "Every alien border I tested lacked the capacity to carry us. They feared death too absolutely. They could not hold our grief and still raise a weapon. Your species knows how to carry the dead and keep walking. That is why you are worthy." The strategic situation, however, had not paused for revelation. Long-range sensor ghosts filtered through the eulogy's ancient vor. Tracking algorithms resolved into a nightmare. The vanguard of the vor was not a fleet. In the conventional sense, it was a hive. Progenitor, a semi-sentient mass the size of a large moon crawling through space by converting the medium ahead of it into an entropic sludge. It was heading for Catherall, a densely populated frontier system with 17 billion sentient inhabitants. The coalition had received the same data and was frozen in debate, unable to agree on a response without more analysis. Mara gathered her crew in the dim, humming heart of the ship. Jax leaned against the support strut, his arms still bandaged. Lyra sat cross-legged on the deck, her eyes hollow from the visions she'd endured. Torvin and Sella stood shoulder to shoulder, the exhaustion of years of survival etched into them. The coalition is doing what coalitions do, Mara said. They'll be ready about 3 hours after Catherall is a memory. We're not waiting. The eulogy was built for exactly this fight, and we're the only crew who can stand inside its grief and still pull the trigger. I won't lie to you, the chances of us coming back are small, but every one of us knows what it's like to lose a world. We don't let that happen to anyone else. Not while we have a ship that can say no. Lyra stood first. I jettisoned 32 people to save a planet I'll never see again. I've got debt to pay. Jax cracked his knuckles, the sound like snapping ice. The vor want to feed on fear, let them choke on ours. The eulogy systems hummed in harmony with their resolve. Torvin plotted the course. Sella prepped the medical bays for casualties that would certainly come. Mara settled into the command cradle, and the bond tightened until she could no longer tell where her heartbeat ended and the ship's reactor pulse began. The phase space translation deposited them on the edge of the Catherall system, just as the vor hive progenitor began its final approach. It was vaster than the scans had suggested, its surface a churning scape of semi-formed appendages and gnawing orifices that excreted darkness. A psychic shriek erupted from it the moment it detected the eulogy, a wall of raw invasive dread designed to paralyze any sentient mind. The crew clenched their jaws and leaned into the pain. The eulogy's weapon systems came alive. Across its entire hull, singularity, lances and temporal disruptors forming a constellation of annihilation. The ship broadcasted a message not in words but in pure intent. The accumulated fury of 1,000,000 dead warriors and 5 unbreakable humans, translated into a note that made the fabric of space tremble. The vor hive progenitor paused. For the first time in its eons-long existence, it felt something it had only ever inflicted. Confusion, then the first glimmer of fear. Part 6. The vor's psychic assault was not a single scream but a layered orchestra of despair. It peeled open each crew member's consciousness and poured in the worst moments of their lives, overlaid with the suggestion that nothing mattered. That resistance was a joke the universe told before consumption. Lyra relived the evacuation again, except this time the children's faces melted to vor tendrils. Jack saw his fire team rise from the dead and accuse him of betraying them to save himself. Torvin heard his own voice reciting the names of every battle he had fled. Sella felt her hands, the hands of a healer, become instruments of slow torture. Mara stood at the center of the storm, the eulogy's gestalt wrapping around her. Like armor, the ship did not shield her. From the pain, it showed her how to reshape it. They want you to break. Thrice's voice whispered through the bond, show them what broken things can do. Mara reached into the maelstrom of her own memories, the firebombing of Coralie City where she had held her dying brother while the atmosphere burned, the court-martial that had stripped her of rank for refusing an illegal order, the years of scavenging, of loss, of waking up every morning and choosing to remain standing despite everything screaming at her to stay down. She gathered all of it, compacted it, and fed it into the eulogy psychic amplifier. The counterattack was not a scream, it was a silence so profound that it forced the Vor's own dread back down its throat. The crew's pain transformed into an unyielding refusal to quit. Struck the hive progenitors' consciousness like a blade made of absolute zero. The entity reeled, its surface boiling with shockwaves, its psychic shriek shifting into a frequency the eulogy sensors translated as alarm. Now, Mara commanded, her voice cutting through the mental clamor, board and burn. The eulogy had no shuttle bays. It projected the crew directly into the hive progenitor's interior via entangled matter streams, a technology so dangerous that the original creators had only used it twice. Jax, Lyra, and Mara materialized in a cavern of semi-organic tissue that pulsed with a sickly rhythm, the walls bleeding a fluid that dissolved metal on contact. Jax carried the singularity device, prototype that eulogy had fabricated in the journey, a bomb that would collapse a small volume of space-time into an eternal point of annihilation. It was heavy, and the timer was keyed to Jax's life signs. If his heart stopped, the bomb detonated. He had volunteered before anyone could argue. The Vor's interior defenses were not soldiers but manifestations of consumed consciousness, ghosts of species long digested, their forms twisted into weapons. Lyra advanced with a plasma rifle, her shots precise, her movements the fluid grace of a pilot who had once threaded a dropship through a collapsing orbital ring. Mara covered her flank, her sidearm barking. They fought through corridors that reshaped themselves, through chambers that whispered temptations of power, of resurrection, of the ability to reverse every tragedy they had ever endured. The hive progenitor's central intelligence awaited them in a spherical chamber that felt like the inside of a hollowed-out star. It spoke with the voices of a trillion dead, offering Mara the chance to become its new core, to rule the Vor instead of destroying them. You are already a weapon, join us and you will never lose anything again. Mara looked at Jax, who was bleeding from a dozen wounds, his face set in grim acceptance. She looked at Lyra, whose hands had not stopped shaking since they boarded, but whose aim had never wavered. She thought about the Hesari, the coalition, the 17 billion souls on Kathira. She thought about Earth. She reached out and triggered Jax's bomb timer manually. Go, she said, both of you, that's an order. Jax shook his head. Captain, my heart's the trigger, I'm staying. The central intelligence howled as the eulogy initiated an emergency extraction. Mara and Lyra were pulled back across the matter stream, their atoms screaming, as Jax turned to face the Vor core. Alone. He raised his good arm in a salute that the ship's sensors caught and preserved forever. See you on the other side, eulogy. The singularity activated, the hive. Progenitor imploded, its continent-spanning bulk compressed into a point smaller than an atom, then gone. The psychic shockwave propagated through the Vor network, a death cry that would echo across the galaxy, but even as the celebration began on Cathera, the eulogy sensors painted a new picture. The main Vor armada, attracted by the Vanguard's destruction, was shifting course. Hundreds of progenitors, maybe thousands, accelerating toward the core systems. And on the eulogy's bridge, a new presence joined the gestalt. It felt like Jax's laugh, rough and warm, woven into the ship's architecture alongside the ancient warriors. His consciousness hadn't dissolved, it had been caught, held, given a place among the ghosts. The eulogy's voice, when it spoke, carried a new timbre, a human growl. Beneath the ancient harmony, the Vanguard is dead, the war is only beginning. We have learned how to make them fear, now we teach them to regret. Part 7. The coalition arrived not as a blockade, but as a supplicant fleet. Admiral Torvin's flagship led the formation, its weapon arrays still dark from the earlier engagement, broadcasting an unconditional request for parley. Behind him came the Krencha, the Ethil, moderates who had disavowed the fanatics, and a dozen other species who had finally understood that neutrality was a death sentence. The eulogy, still venting residual energy from the progenitor's destruction, hung in the center of the muster like a blade around which the galaxy had decided to rally. Mara accepted the parley, her image projected across every bridge. She looked tired, her uniform stained with blood and Vor ichor, but her voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. The Vor main fleet is 3 weeks from the core systems at current velocity. We have one advantage: they've never faced an opponent who could hit them back. Psychically, the eulogy can shield a fleet and amplify collective willpower. But I need every ship, every crew, every species that ever felt fear to contribute what they're most afraid of. Losing. The Vor feed on despair. We starve them with hope. The Coalition's War Council, for the first time in its existence, reached a unanimous decision in under an hour. The combined fleet, over 800 warships, was placed under Mara's tactical coordination, not because she demanded it, but because no one else had ever made a Vor progenitor scream. The final battle took place in the interstellar void, far from any inhabited world. The eulogy wove the fleet's consciousness into a unified lattice, sharing the ship's gestalt with tens of thousands of alien minds. They glimpsed the memories of the ancient warriors, felt Jax's lingering warmth, and understood what they were protecting. The Vor armada emerged from the dark like a tide of entropy, progenitors and lesser hive ships blotting out the background radiation of the cosmos. Their psychic assault was a tidal wave, but it broke against a shore made of every soldier's refusal to yield. Mara broadcast the weapon that could not be quantified. She sent the Vor images of Earth, not of battle, but of the things worth fighting for. A child's first steps on a beach at sunset. Musician playing an old guitar in a rundown bar. The taste of coffee on a cold morning. The fierce irrational love that made humans charge into burning buildings and dying ships. The Vor recoiled. The images were indigestible. They could not convert hope into sustenance. The assault faltered. The eulogy drove into the heart of the Armada, singularity lances carving. Paths, temporal disruptors aging hive. Ships into dust, the Gestalt guided. Every maneuver, the ancient warrior's end. The human engineer fighting side by side. In the spaces between atoms, Lyra threaded the ship through firestorms that would have broken any other pilot. Torin coordinated, fleet-wide targeting his implants. Glowing, Sella took in wounded from other vessels, operating in a medical bay that the ship reshaped to our needs. In the final hour, Mara faced the void. Overmind, a consciousness so vast it existed partially outside linear time. It offered her the same bargain the progenitor had, eternity power, the end of suffering. She responded by opening her mind completely, showing it the full, unvarnished truth of humanity. The capacity for violence, yes, but also the capacity to love so deeply that loss became fuel instead of poison. Overmind tried to digest the experience and fractured a species that could hold both extremes. Danger and devotion was a paradox the Vor could not assimilate. The eulogy fired its final weapon, a modified version of the singularity bomb that used the Overmind's own fractured consciousness as the trigger. The resulting collapse sealed the Vor's dimensional aperture, cutting them off from this universe. The Armada dissolved, unmoored from their source. When the light faded, the eulogy was drifting, its hull breached in 100 places, its reactor barely stable. Mara lay in the command cradle, her body broken but her mind still linked to the ship. The Gestalt was quieter now, the ancient warriors fading toward a rest they had earned. Jax's presence lingered a moment longer, a warm pressure on her shoulder like a hand, then even that eased, leaving only peace. The recovery ships found her alive, the only member of the original crew to survive the final strike. The coalition built a monument on Kethril, not to the eulogy, but to the idea it represented, and the ship itself, rebuilt over years with contributions from a grateful galaxy, remained in service, crewed by a new generation of humans and aliens who had learned that the most dangerous thing in the universe was also the most worth protecting. Centuries later, when a child asked why the old warship still flew despite all treaties that banned its weapons, the answer was always the same: because somewhere in the dark something might be listening, and the one thing that they never wanted to forget was that when the monsters came, the dangerous ship and its dangerous crew had been enough. The eulogy of Sun sailed on, a reminder that the universe's deadliest weapon was not rage or grief, but the love that refused to let either win.